This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This is Sarah, and I just want to take a moment to speak to you about this week's sponsor, Favor. Favor, Inc. is a statewide family-led nonprofit 501c3 organization that is committed to empowering families as advocates and partners in improving educational and health outcomes for our children. Favor is the Connecticut state organization of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Favor offers a single place for families with children who have medical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to find information, assistance, and training. To find out more about Favor, please go to favor-ct.org. We are grateful for our opportunity to work with Favor as a sponsor, and now on to the rest of the episode.
This episode is brought to you by Caregiving. Caregiving provides cognitive assessment tools to a broad range of healthcare providers for the early detection of cognitive impairment. Early detection allows patients to address modifiable risk factors sooner, potentially changing the course of cognitive decline. It also allows healthcare providers to develop a plan with the patient and caregiver so the patient can live their best life during their journey. For more information, go to www.cognivue.com. That's www.cognivue.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles. My name is Sarah, and today I have Jim Cooper with me. Jim is the author of the book, The Not So Little Book of Cancer Caregiving. Be a caregiver warrior and keep your sanity. He is also a caregiver for his wife with brain cancer. Hello, Jim, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm very honored to be part of this. So really looking forward to this and having a good conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Do you mind further introducing yourself to my audience?
Yeah, sure. That's not a problem. Caregiving came out of nowhere. It wasn't my profession, certainly. My resume kind of looks like a chutes and ladders game on crack. I mean, it's been all over the place. I started out in radio, went to manage a photography studio, worked in real estate, built houses, worked in the computer industry for about 25 years in IT, worked in corporate. At one point ran my own baking business, had my own consulting business, have written a novel, and now this is the second book, which is nonfiction. And I've been doing voiceover for the past 6 years. So I'm all over the place. I just do whatever the next thing that comes up is. So that's kind of my life in a nutshell. Some of my passions are music in all of its forms, whether it's listening, playing. I'm a drummer. I fool around with the guitar. I can kind of make my way on the piano after all those piano lessons 50 years ago. But music in all its forms and being on the beach is just, that's my passions at the moment.
That's awesome. I love that. I think it's well, first of all, you have like an incredibly impressive resume. You've done every single thing there is to do.
I tried.
I'm going to ask you about your sleeping habits, but later.
What are those? I don't know what that is.
Exactly. Well, do you want to talk about, and you said caregiving kind of just came out of nowhere, and that's a familiar story for a lot of family caregivers.
Right.
Are you willing to share that caregiver journey with us?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this came out of nowhere in 2014. My wife started acting funny. I mean, there were some things going on that did kind of make me think twice about it. She was having problems coming up with words. She would talk to you and then just stop, and nothing was there. Her arms started moving on their own. She'd go to grab something and the arm would just fly out, and it looked like she was directing 747s on the tarmac at the airport. So it's things like that started happening. And then we were at a party on the beach in July of 2014, and she had one drink, and it's like she went into alcohol poisoning. Everything shut down, and it was a fairly frightening moment. But that kind of made me go, So we spent a while after that, and some of the symptoms continued and got worse, but that was July, and it really wasn't until late October, early November that we got the diagnosis of large B-cell lymphoma in her brain. And that period of July to November, probably one of the worst periods of my life as a caregiver, because I like to have answers, and when there are no answers coming, that just creates a whole deep sense of fear for me that everything is out of control, and being a control freak, that's not where you want to be. So anyway, we ended up with the right people in the right place at the right time with the right healers. And we consider ourselves so lucky and have so much gratitude, because everything that could have possibly gone right went right. And she went through treatment for a year, had 10 chemo treatments, and then a stem cell transplant at the end. She's been clear, coming up on 9 years this July. So it's we're very thankful for all the people that were involved. That's kind of the short version of whole things. But going through that journey, I felt like I was sitting like on the fringe of things. I was just like, I'm on the outside here. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And one of the first things I decided to do was start writing. The first week of treatment that we were in Sloan Kettering was Thanksgiving week, which was not a fun week to be there. Thanksgiving Day, we sat and watched the parade that was happening 3 avenues over, and it's like, why don't you bring those guys down here? So, but I needed to start writing, one, to keep my own sanity, and two, I stumbled into the fact that this is a great way to keep everyone informed, and so I don't have to make 15,000 phone calls every day to her brothers and sister and her relatives and my family and friends and that kind of thing. And so I just started writing about it, and I called it Fringe Observations in the initial stages, and people came out of the woodwork. We had 40, 50 people from our high school class start making comments and likes, and I'm like, where are all these people coming from? So it was just such a humbling moment that, people are willing to jump in. So going through the treatment, I saw a lot of different things, and I assume we'll cover a bunch of them as we go on later. But when we got to the end, it was like, this has worked so well for us, and it hasn't worked for so many other people for whatever reason, because people still die from this disease. I needed to give back in some way. And at that time, Sloan Kettering was just starting a caregiver to caregiver program. They had a patient to patient program, but caregiving was just starting to get noticed as, hey, these people are going through as much stress as the patients are. And what can we do to help? And they came up with this program. So I joined that, which was wonderful. I got to talk to other people going through the same things that I went through, and I was able to just listen to them and hear what they were doing. But out of all that, I wanted to give back in some more substantial way. So I took all those fringe observations that I had written and kind of threw them together. And I'm like, how am I going to make that into something that, one, is going to help people, and two, is going to be something people really want to read? I didn't want it to be a dry medical thing. So hopefully I've come across with some humor and some emotion and some heartfelt and some real reaction to all the different emotions and things that came up during that period, because it is a roller coaster. There's no question about it. You are on for the ride of your life, and all you can do is hang on and just hope and pray, and then lean on other people. The one big thing I tell everybody, you are not alone. You don't have to do this alone. that was a big learning lesson for me because I thought I did at the time, but we can get into that as we go on.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know you talked about support coming out of nowhere, but also feeling like you're alone in certain aspects too. I feel like sometimes I find support as, and this is just my experience as a caregiver, sometimes I find better support. And it's not that the people that I'm close to aren't trying to help. I'm trying to phrase this in a nice way. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But it's not that my close friends and my close family aren't trying to help. It's that sometimes they say things that are like duh things, and without realizing like what if I just brought dinner over? You know what I mean? Like I could do something simple as I have these leftovers. What if I just bring these leftovers over so they can just heat them up and not have to cook a meal? Rather than say, well, oh, did you take care of yourself today? It's such like a duh thing. Like or have you tried deep breathing today? Family and friends, and I know they're trying to be supportive. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but so many people don't know how to help caregivers, right? Like they don't know unless they've actually been one.
Right.
And I think it's funny because the people who have given me the most valuable suggestions with self-care, with my journey with my kids, which is very different from your journey, are people who have been in a similar situation.
And one of the things, and I witnessed this one day in the lobby at Sloan, because all of her treatments, she had to be inpatient 2 or 3 or 4 days until the chemo flushed itself out. But sitting down in the lobby, which was kind of the outpatient waiting area, and witnessing some of the family dynamics, because if someone was having surgery or having a procedure of some sort, the whole family would show up, and just listening to the family dynamics and the clashes that people went through. This person says, no, we should be doing this. No, we should be doing this. No, we should be, so everyone has their ideas on what should happen. And that fascinated me, because it's like, here we have someone who's battling cancer and you guys are trying to fight this thing out. And it's like, you're missing the point here. When and it's funny you said, let me make you dinner and come over, because that's something I requested that they do. It took me a long time to get to the point where I can ask them for help. I don't have to wait for them to offer help. I can ask them for help. When my wife was doing the stem cell transplant, it's 3 straight weeks in the hospital. And I said to my sister-in-law and to my daughter, I said, you know what you can do? Make me some meals, throw them in some Tupperware that I can throw them in the freezer here in the hospital, because I stayed with my wife the whole time. And I said, that way I don't have to be going out and spending money and eating in the cafeteria and all that stuff, which they did, which they loved doing. And it was great. I could take something out, warm it up, and that was kind of my self-care downtime, was dinner time. I would take one of those, I'd heat it up, I'd go in the little eating area, put my headphones on and watch an episode of MASH or something like that, something that just took me out of myself. So it's one of the things, like I said, I had to learn was you can ask people for help. And, it's okay to say, no, thanks, I'm good. Saying no can be just as difficult sometimes, because everybody wants to help. I get it. And maybe they say things that aren't all that helpful, but they don't know either, because they've never been down this road. So it all depends on what mood the caregiver is in when they approach you, because that plays a big part of it. If you've had a really bad day, it's just like, no, get out of my face. Just go away for 2-3 hours and then come back, and then we can talk later, because I can't deal with this right now.
Yeah. I can completely relate to that too. And I know a lot of family caregivers who can. And I know even early stages of diagnosis and going through that process, it's so overwhelming. And I know everyone might like reach out and, oh, I can do this. And what about this? And what about that? And it's all in help, but your head's already spinning,
Right.
It's easier when you get into the swing of things to figure out what you need. Sometimes you don't even know what you need as a caregiver, just like when you're the patient. Sometimes you don't even know what you need.
Right.
At
And at the beginning, I had no clue. I had no clue. Like I said, the first week we were there was Thanksgiving week. And the day after Thanksgiving, my wife's uncle and brother and our daughter came up to the hospital, because we were still there. And her uncle said to me, come on, you need a break. I'm taking you out to lunch. And I'm like, break? What the hell are you talking about? And so he dragged me out of the hospital. We sat down in a restaurant, and I was like, oh, this is what it's like not to eat out of a styrofoam container with plastic utensils. And that was a very big light bulb moment for me. It's like, yes, I need to take breaks for me. And that started to really work itself in. And a couple weeks down the road, when we were home one time, and my wife was getting there, but she still couldn't really be on her own just yet. And we got very lucky in that both my daughter and my sister-in-law lived about 10, 15 minutes away from us. So I called my sister-in-law, Katie, and I said, can you come over for 90 minutes? I just need to get the hell out of here. And she would gladly do it and come over and sit with her sister. And I'd get in the car. I would just drive. I'd go to Wawa, get something to drink. It just that break is enough to kind of recharge my batteries. And okay, now I can go back in and start thinking with a clear head instead of thinking I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah. And I think that that's awesome too. And again, I think it's so important to have family and friends, and the fact that you were able to advocate, I need 90 minutes.
Yep.
I just need an hour, an hour and a half. That's it. I
And
think that that's
advocation is a huge part of this. And one of the biggest, and to this day, whatever power is out there that's guiding me, I'm so thankful for this. When Sally, my wife, got her diagnosis, we were at a different hospital, and we weren't crazy about the treatment we were getting at that hospital. But when they told us it was lymphoma, and they were like, okay, we got to go up here. You got to start treatment. I was like, whoa, can we have 24 hours to absorb the fact that you just told us we have cancer? So we went home, and then the next morning, I was like, we don't have much of a choice. So I dialed that doctor's number, and before I hit the green button, I was like, no. And I closed the phone. I was like, I don't know what the answer is, but this isn't right. And to make a long story short, through other calls we made, we ended up in absolutely where we were supposed to be. So listening to your gut instinct and then acting and doing the advocation thing, absolutely critical. Can't stress it enough.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to ask too, the type of B cell lymphoma that she had in the brain, how common is that, and what is the survival rate of that, if you know that information?
Fortunately, it's very survivable. It is a very treatable form of cancer. It's not the big gun that is the problem is glioblastoma, which are the tumors, and the mortality rate on that is high. But what she had was very treatable. It's very similar to MS. In that the lesions in her brain, he's showing pictures of her brain. I don't know if you've ever seen like pumpkins or watermelons grow where they have those tendrils that kind of reach out all over the place. That's what her brain looked like. It had a couple small masses and then just these tendrils of stuff going all over the place. So we got very lucky with that, in that it was a very treatable, and the success rate is high. And I don't say they were just starting, but they were just into the program of doing stem cell transplants to treat this. And their success rate there was phenomenally high, especially for someone who had the health that Sally had and the age she was. So they were like, you should do this. Because she went through 10 treatments and it was about 95% clear. And they were like, well, we can do radiation or we can do the stem cell transplant. And we're like, transplant. Let's not do the radiation. They're like, good, because we don't want to do radiation if we can avoid it. And it kicked the last 5% out. So, it's that kind of trust and faith that keeps you going. But
Thank you.
But for her condition, yes, it's a lot of people have been successfully treated with it. And it's interesting talking to other caregivers that have gone through the same thing at Sloan through the program. The success rate is very high. I still keep in touch with some of them, and they're like, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So it's a good thing.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that, because it's important to know. I know every situation is different. There's different types of cancers. that affect the same parts of the body differently,
Right.
and it's important to understand that without, obviously without getting too technical, and spitting out like doctor information. So I really appreciate you answering that. And I want to ask too, because I know that like any brain injury, whether it is a cancer or a injury or any kind of trauma like that to the brain, does have oftentimes does have long-term lasting effects.
Mhm.
Is your wife having long-term effects, or has she made a full and complete recovery?
Both.
Okay.
Um, and I'll clarify that she's cancer free, because of the spots where the cancer was in her brain. Those are going to be more susceptible to deterioration, as she ages and as certain things happen. For example, during the stem cell treatment, she was having a lot of pain with something, and they gave her a morphine-based drug to deal with that. And after 9 months, 10 months of dealing with this, all the original symptoms came back. And I spent an entire sleepless night going, what the hell is going on here? We just went through all this. And it turns out that, the doctor, who was wonderful, explained to me, said, look, if she has something that's this heavy, a dose of morphine or something like it, it's going to impact those areas because they are a little deteriorated from what they were originally. And they took her off the medication, and 24 hours later, she was fine. So it's like there are long-term things you have to watch out for. And I'm sure as we age and go down the road, some of the things like trying to come up with words will get tougher and tougher and tougher. And the doctors have said, yeah, it's just the nature of the beast. So, but as far as the cancer itself, we go once a year to check under the hood, get an MRI, and make sure everything's still good. And and so far, knock wood, it's going well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that information also. I know you said, you started writing your book while you were in the hospital to kind of keep people informed and document your journey and stuff like that. And I've spoken to other people who were caregivers who were documenting their journey, whether it be like video diary, audio diary,
Right.
or written, and have turned them into books as well. When you were starting to write this down, were you thinking like this is going to be a book someday? Or were you thinking like, I just need to get this out and this is the best way to communicate with everyone what's going on?
Yeah, the very first night we spent in the hospital, Sally was in bed, and they had one of those sleeper chairs. It's like a transformer, it turns into bed. And I was sitting there staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m, wondering what the hell am I doing in a hospital in New York City, staring at the ceiling. And I thought, you know what? I need to just write about this just to keep my sanity. I mean, that was the down and dirty first thought, is like, I just need to write something about this. And I didn't even write about the cancer. I was just writing about, hey, I'm counting the holes in the ceiling and just different observations that I had made, during the day about the nurses and where we were and that kind of thing. So it wasn't even a detailed, here's what's going on with the disease. It was more just, I just need to write something to keep my sanity.
Yeah. That's awesome. At what point did you decide that needed to become a book? Was it after the recovery?
It was after. It was, if it wasn't after, it was close to being after that. I looked at this mass of material, because I wrote probably not necessarily every day, but at least every other day, and whether we were in the hospital or at home. So I had amassed quite a number of, a year's worth of entries into social media. So I started thinking there's got to be something here somewhere. And the real trick was getting it into a form that people would want to read, because I knew the information that was there. The question is, how are we going to present it?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I know the structure of your book has tips and advice. It's not just your story, it's tips and advice. And it's kind of like you described it when we talked before, kind of like a guide. Can you get a little more into that for me?
Sure. Yeah. And one of the decisions that we made is like, so people can have something that they can use and refer to, finally came down to, well, let's just give a series of caregiver tips and talk a little bit about that, and then end up using our journey, whether it was Sally's journey or my journey, as kind of like the backstory behind those tips to kind of display and describe how those come into play. So that started to coalesce into something that I thought was pretty good. And then one of my early readers suggested, is like, hey, why don't you make this a workbook and so people can actually use it? And I thought, that's a great idea. So at the end of every chapter, and every chapter is a different tip, there's some lined pages, and I ask a couple questions. There's where caregivers can make notes or put names or phone numbers or just write themselves about, hey, I'm really having a stressful day, whatever it happens to be. So that kind of format really appealed to me. And when that all came together, and this was, a couple of years after treatment was over, I played around with this thing for a while. Once we stumbled on that format, I was like, yeah, this is going to work. This is a good thing. And it's something I can give back with, something people can use, and hopefully helps people as they read it.
Thank you so much for that too. I really like the idea of a book kind of being like a workbook type thing, especially again for caregivers who are in the hospital, who are spending a lot of time with their loved one, in a place where they can't do like all the other tasks that have to be done. They just have to be present. So I think that that's super important. And I know you mentioned too that you joined a support group at the time at the hospital, and you still volunteer in the support group also.
Right.
Would you like to share a little bit about that?
It's kind of fun, and this is the caregiver support crew, and I actually ended up volunteering at one of the Sloan Kettering locations in New Jersey, just to hang out in the treatment centers and talk to caregivers and tell them about the program if they were interested and that kind of thing. So, there was a very good system set up where we were, where there was a social worker on every floor, just about it. And the floor that she was on was the neurological floor. So there was a guy there named Glenn who was really cool. And Sally was having a real bad day, as patients will. Caregivers have bad days. Patients have bad days. It's the name of the game. And I just kind of knocked on Glenn's door, and I was like, hey, can you go talk to Sally? Just she's not having a good time. So not that anyone has a good time, but she's not having a good day. Which he did, and it was wonderful. And I was thinking, that's so key to this, to talk to other people, and not even so much talk, but give them an ability to talk. And all you have to do is listen. And most of the caregiving that I do in this support group is listening. It's just listening to what they're going through, and I can go, yeah, I did that too. And, just to let them know that, one, they are not alone, and two, what they're going through, other people have gone through, so it's not abnormal. They're not losing their minds. And, and it doesn't even have to be something official like this was. There was a woman who had flown from Switzerland to be a caregiver for her mom, who was going through treatment. And, she had husband and kids, and they were all back in Switzerland, but they ended up being on kind of the same schedule that my wife was. And her mom's last name was Cooperman, which drove the nurses out of their minds. Everyone, every so often, one would come in and say, Mrs. Cooperman, and we're like, no. And then another one would come in, Mrs. Cooperman, no. So I finally had to track down what was going on and learned all about this. But the woman from Switzerland, Abby, she and I kind of started talking to each other as the caregivers. And I can remember one day walking down the hall, and Abby was just leaning against the wall with her head down. And I know what that look is. That look is, I can't take another minute of this. And so I walked up to her and I said, what's going on? And we talked for a while, and she talked and cried, and, we were there for each other. And, one of the big things she was feeling was guilt. And it was like, yeah, that is part of this game. Superman sometimes takes his cape off. We can't all do that 24/7. So, and Abby and I are still in touch. We keep in touch. Unfortunately, her mom passed away, but we still keep in touch. And, it can be an completely offhand meeting in a hallway somewhere that, you do some good. And it works on the other side too. I remember going back to the hospital. This is about the 5-year mark, just for a checkup, and we ran into one of Sally's nurses on the stem cell floor, and she was like, "So glad to see you. I've got a woman here who's at that critical point in the stem cell, which is when you're just out. All your immunities are gone and you're just out. She's really having a tough time." And Sally was like, "Let's go talk to her." So they gown up, mask up, glove up, and she goes in and talks to her for 20 minutes. And that's the kind of stuff you do. It's just when the opportunity arises, you just jump in and see if there's anything that you can do to help the other caregiver or the other patient.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important, and there's something so like validating of just someone listening to your story and
Mhm.
saying, I get it. Not even trying to offer advice or solutions, just the I've been there. I get it.
Right.
And even a simple, you're allowed to hate this. You're allowed to feel like this sucks, because sometimes
It
people
does.
outside of the caregiving world have this slightly delusional notion that you're not allowed to be frustrated, overwhelmed, or just say, hey, my situation sucks. There's toxic positivity. You have to be grateful
Right.
for every situation you're in. And sometimes, I don't know.
It's tough to find sometimes. It's tough to find, but you do have to be almost on constant vigilance about doing it. There was one day, and I was having a bad day because while we were in the hospital, I would make sure Sally was all taken care of in the morning, and then they had this great rec center up on the 15th floor. I could go up there with my laptop because I was still working 8 hours a day at this point. I'd go up there with my laptop and do what I needed to do. And it was a crappy day at work. It was a crappy day. I was just not in the mood for any of this. So I'm down, I just finished lunch, so I'm down on the bottom floor, and I get into the elevator, and I hear, "Hold the elevator, please." And I'm like, okay, fine. So I hold the elevator. Woman in her 30s, pushing a wheelchair with a 9-10-year-old girl in it, bald, hooked up to IVs, and wheels into the elevator. And I kind of look down at the kid, and I'm going, "How you doing?" And she's like, "I've got one more treatment, and then I'm out of here." I'm like, "You stay tough." And I kind of looked up at Mom, and I could see that glaze in her eyes, that she's just like hanging on by her fingernails. Changed my perspective immediately and completely. All the things I was bitching about didn't mean shit at that point. And not that this whole journey doesn't change your perspective completely, because it does. But in that moment, just looking at that going, holy cow, what am I bitching about? And you look for things like that to completely turn yourself around.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that story too, because I think it's so important. And, I know that like I've had my days where I've been like, I'm having the worst day ever
Right.
caregiving. Again, I'm not cancer caregiving. But still, we all as caregivers
Same thing.
experience the worst day ever. And then we hear someone else's story and we're like, oh my God, at least it's not that situation, because I don't think I could handle that.
We would do that all the time. If Sally was having a tough day, I would get her up out of the bed, and we'd drag her IV stand alone and just walk around the hall in the hospital and look around. And all of a sudden you start to realize things could be a whole lot worse than they are. And all of a sudden that gratitude, which is so important, comes creeping back in. And it's a great, because some people, there's two ways to approach this. You can either approach it with a positive attitude, or you can be bitter and angry. And the people that are bitter and angry usually are the ones that don't make it, because you've got to keep some sort of positivity. And I'm not saying be Mary Poppins, but you've got to keep that focus on things. And I always used to look for distractions that I could point out to Sally, and there were some great ones when we were in the hospital. There was a clock, in my school. There were clocks like in the hallway that kind of hung out. I did traditional old school standard clock. They had them all over the hospital halls. I walked down the hall one day and looked up at the clock and noticed that it was running backwards. the second hand was going the wrong way. I stood at it, and one of the cleaning lady was looking at me going, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Come here, look at this." And she kind of looked at the clock and went, "Don't be messing with me. I can't handle stuff like that." So I went to Sally's room and said, "Come on, you've got to come see this." And wheeled her out there and showed her the clock. The little distractions that you can find like that can sometimes just make the whole day brighter, as insignificant as it may be. It's just a necessity for both caregiver and patient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just mention too, because you mentioned that you were working full time during all of this. How did you manage it all? How did you balance everything?
One of the things that I realized fairly early on that I would absolutely have to do, or I would crash and burn, is get organized. Especially when you're coming home with a doggy bag of medications, and this one you take once a day, this one you take 3 times a week, this one you take when there's an R in the day, this one when the Yankees win. There's so many different things to do. So the first thing I had to do was get organized. And that first night back, I sat down with a paper and pencil and just wrote everything out for the next week until the next treatment, just so I wouldn't have to think about it. I could look at the paper and go, okay, this is due then, and then, and then. So that organization becomes even more key when you're still trying to work. And fortunately, 2 things. I was working for a large corporation and had the Rolls Royce of healthcare plans, which is a whole different topic we can talk about, which is money. And then the other side of that is that all the people I was working with were so supportive, from my boss to my coworkers to people that were just colleagues. And, my boss kept saying to me, "Look, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to go on FMLA, the Family Leave Act, and make sure you take care of all this." So they were just so supportive and made sure that I got the space I needed to take care of Sally and hopefully not screw them up at the same time, which I'm sure I did from time to time, but I couldn't worry about that. I had to focus on this. So it's a matter of having the right support and getting organized.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you're very lucky, because not everybody has
No.
a healthy, good work environment or even good healthcare. Those, like you said, those are 2 other topics. Not everyone has
Right.
either. Even I think even just one of those is a luxury today. To have both, that's amazing, and I'm super happy.
Yeah, it was like I said early on, everything that could go right went right, and there's no end to either of our gratitude for everything that happened and everyone that was involved.
Yeah. And I think corporations need to, as just all of them in general, should be treating their employees like people, and when they're going through crisis, should be supporting their employees in a way of like, hey, we get it, like, this is what we can do, this is what you can do, and just trying to offer that support.
Right.
And any company, because the fact of the matter is things happen, life happens, your
Things
job
happen,
is just your job.
And it's a tough call, for these companies, especially the middle and the medium and small ones, because it is so expensive to offer this to your people. And of course you want to take care of them, but you also have to run a business. So it's playing that balancing act of the people that you answer to. And if you're a large corporation, you've got shareholders to answer to. And, so it's tough, especially for the small and medium-sized businesses to run that. But such is the name of the game of our wacky healthcare system in the United States.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for sharing that. And what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting on a cancer diagnosis for their loved one?
Right from the start, think about what you need to do to take care of yourself. Because if the caregiver doesn't take care of themselves, the patient's not going to get taken care of either. So you've got to start thinking about, what are the things that I can do for me? And a lot of people say, that sounds so selfish. And you know what? It is selfish, but it is also critical, because without it, you're going to crash and burn. And I crashed and burned a couple times in my journey because I let that self-care lapse far too long and ended up, I actually ended up going back to see a therapist for a couple of visits because I was just so deep in the weeds, I couldn't see what I was doing. So one, get rid of that stigma that you can do this by yourself, because you can't. You need help. And I don't care whether you see, a therapist, a priest, the barber, the disposal people. I don't care who you talk to, but you've got to have someone to talk to. The other thing I would say right up front is get a good grip on whatever spirituality you have. And I don't care if you worship turquoise penguins dancing the merengue in Nebraska on alternate Thursdays. I don't care. But if it gives you a sense of peace, that's what you've got to hold on to. Because I know I have a sense of spirituality, and I leaned on it heavily. When I'm pacing around the halls at 2 a.m, talking to my higher power about, hey, you're in control here. I'm out of the game. I'm not in control of this. It is absolutely critical that you have something, whatever it happens to be for you, to lean on when times get tough, because they will.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that those are super important tips. Making sure you have someone to talk to. Making sure I'm a huge advocate for support groups. I never thought I would join one, and it was a life-changing experience for me. I'm like terrified of dealing with my own emotions and don't really want to deal with other people's either at that time. But joining the support group changed my life because I realized it was so much more than that. It was the first time I felt
it's a
like,
critical thing.
it.
Absolutely. I applaud you for doing that, because that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's no matter what the diagnosis is.
Right.
If you're taking care of something, you should be in some kind of support group where people get it. I want to ask you my my favorite question to ask my guests. What is your favorite form of self-care?
One, music. We talked a little bit about that before. I mean, if I can listen to put headphones on and just listen to music, I can get lost in music very easily, or pick up guitar and play with it. Or if I'm in a space where I can do some drumming, I'll do some drumming. But music is so critical to my soul. I love cooking. Being in the kitchen is very therapeutic for me. It doesn't matter, I don't have to be making a gourmet meal, even if it's just like a grilled cheese sandwich. Cooking is very therapeutic for me. So I enjoy that. Taking a walk on the beach, is beyond therapeutic. Got real lucky in that where Sloan Kettering was located on the east side of New York, it's one avenue away from the East River. And there were days when the weather was nice that I would just go out and walk, and they had a walking trail right along the water. I would just walk up and down the East River and watch the boats, and that was just settling enough. And that spoke a lot to me about having to be in the moment. And that is the other thing, is like, I practice some meditation. I was fortunate at one point to have some coach who was very big into Zen meditation. So I can do that. I can just sit and just be in the moment and not think about anything. Just pay attention to all the sounds that are around me to take me out of my head. So things like that to take care of yourself are just ultra critical.
I love that. And those are some of my favorite forms of self-care too. Music, we listen to music every day in this house. Sometimes and we always kind of match our mood with it, or my mood, because I'm the one in control of the music. That's not always true either, but we match, you match your mood with the music, and you can kind of build up from there. In the beach, we're beach bums. Meditation, again, another great thing. And when you don't have time to meditate, and when you don't have the money to go and do whatever it is, you can always put your favorite song on. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like you can, that is probably like one of the cheapest, best forms of self-care. Like,
right.
Playing your favorite song on CD or on, nobody uses CDs anymore. Everybody streams. And I love cooking when my kids aren't home.
I understand that.
That's a whole other thing.
Yes.
But we had one night, we had a date night in, my husband and I, and we could not afford to go out. My parents were like, we're gonna take the kids for the night for you guys so you guys can get a break. But we could not afford, we couldn't even, my mom was like, why don't you go to a local bar and have a beer? I'm like, I can't even afford to buy a six pack, never mind a beer in a bar this week. Like that's like it's not happening. Like we got hit with a few things and we're like, we're gonna stay home, we're gonna cook dinner at home, and we'll have, I have wine on the counter that I opened 6 months ago that's still there that we'll just drink that. It's
Hopefully
not
it
the
was red
best.
wine and not white wine.
No, it was white. It didn't taste very good, but we put an ice cube in it. It was fine. No worse than what I drank in college. Um,
I understand that. I understand that.
I've drank way worse. So we just played games and like had dinner and a friend of mine came by and we just had a good time. Like it was what it was. And that's what you gotta do sometimes. And it was so fun for me and him to cook dinner together and listen to music.
You do
And
what you can. You know,
exactly.
you can't beat yourself up for not being able to do the things you think you should be doing. Like, get rid of that word out of your vocabulary immediately, should, because there is no should. There is, here's what we can do. Sally's second treatment was in the middle of December, and her third treatment was scheduled for 2 days before Christmas. And I was like, how are we going to do this with, getting everything decorated and the grandkids and the kids? And it's just, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And, my daughter called me, thank God. And she said, look, me and Katie and Stephen and Uncle Jim are going to decorate the house for you. And I was like, oh, sweet. So, but, and which they did. And we came home and, all the house was decorated outside, but they even surprised even me. We went inside and they had a tree up and decorated as well. So it was just like, oh, wow. So and then we got another Christmas present from our neurologist. He said, you know what? Don't come in until the 26th. You don't need to be here over Christmas Eve and Christmas. I was like, thank you. So, you do what you can with what you've got. And there was a long period of time where Sally couldn't see the grandkids because her immunities were down. And that was a big deal because Sally lives for her kids and her grandkids. So you've got to get in that space of, and it's not always easy to do what you can do and not what you want to do, because you start to feel very angry that why can't I do what I want to do? But you have to stay in the focus of here's what I can do, and then get creative about it.
Exactly. I love that. I love that advice. Thank you so much for sharing that too. And my final question, where can my audience find you for more information?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, and it's available in Kindle and paperback. The audiobook version is coming. The website for the book is also coming, but it will be under the publishing name of the book, which is faceplantbooksllc.com. And that's not up and running yet, but it's in the process of being built. And in the meantime, you can always grab me at my voiceover website, which is jimcoopervo.com. And you can always reach out to me there. And that's probably the easiest place to get me for the moment. But all the book stuff is still in process and coming soon.
Fantastic. And I will have the link to your book through Amazon on our show notes for my audience.
Cool.
And again, the title of your book, The Not So Little Book of Cancer Caregiving, Be a Caregiver Warrior and Keep Your Sanity.
Yep.
Or just for anybody who needs to hear it. And I would recommend this book. I think that this is a great format and just, a great story. Thank you so much, Jim.
Oh, thank you for this opportunity. Anything that I can do to help others going through it is what I want to do. It's the point of this book. And I'll talk to anybody at any time to help them get through whatever they're going through, because it's not tough. But if we can all do it together, we can make it a little bit easier.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. And that will wrap up this week's episode of Caregiver Chronicles. I want to thank everybody for listening. And if you liked what you heard or you like this episode, please share it with a friend. That helps us out a lot. You can find us at stelmachbrandmedia.com. You just click under the Caregiver Chronicles link. If you want to support the show, we have a space to do so on our website. But the best way to really help us out and really support our show is to share this with 1 friend, 2 friends, 5 friends, all your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.